Hello everyone, as we said last time, even though there's probably not an obligation, or a semi-obligation perhaps, to make up the laning you missed if you travel from outside of Israel to Israel during these 5 weeks in which there's a gap of laning, there is an obligation that's personal. And that's what the Gemara says in Maseches Brachos Lavchet Amud Aleph, La'olam yashlim adav parshiyotav im hatzibur shtayim mikra ve'echad targum. A person is always obligated to read the Parsha of the week, twice the psukim, and one time the translation. Well, what does this mean? Comes along the Ra'avan, one of the Gdolei Ashkenaz. We're talking about Rav Eliezer bar Rabbi Natan from Magenza, his year 1090 to 1170. He actually corresponded with Rabbeinu Tam, who was younger than him, as well as having very important son-in-laws, Rav Yoel Halevi, the father of the Ravya. He comes along and says that this obligation doesn't apply to every Jew. As a matter of fact, it only applies to B'yachid Adar Bekrach Shemayri She'en Lo Asara Likrot B'Torah Shetzarich Lechaben L'Sha'ah Shekorin Matzibur B'Parsha B'Beit HaKnesset V'Yikra Gam Hu B'yachid Shtayim Mikra V'Keneged Shnayim HaKorim B'Beit HaKnesset V'Kargum Keneged HaMetargim B'Beit HaKnesset. So once upon a moon, you had two people at the bima. You had the guy reading the Torah, you had the Gabbai, and you had the Metargim, the guy who translated it. So since you're not going to be in shul because you're living in a place without a minyan, so when they read it, say, in New York City at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're living near New York City, but in some favofana place, you have to read it at the same time, twice, connected the two people at the bima, and one targum, one translation, connected the person at the bima that's doing targum. That was what the Gemara meant. We would have no problem. We'd never have to do what we call ma'aver sedra. But the Ra'avan says, Afal Pikein, even though I said that, min hagenu min hagamur, it's at least a minhag, the zimnin de lomatzi mechavin da'ate bebet hakneset l'chol parasha, v'yatza bekriya shekara kvar. What are you going to do even if you're in shul? Sometimes you don't have kavana for that week's parsha, and therefore it's better to do it alone. He says it's a minhag, but most Rishonim say it's not a minhag, it's an actual din. You're going to be in shul, you're going to have kavana. Having said that, the Shulchan Aruch paskins v'man reish pehei afal pisha adam shomea kol haTorah kula kol Shabbat b'tzibur chayav likrot la'atzmo bechol shavua parshat oto hashavua shtayim mikra ve'echad targum. Even though you're going to be in shul, you're going to listen attentively, you have to read it before. Twice psukim, once the translation. And the Hagaot Maimoniot, talking about Rabbi Meir bar Rabbi Yekuta el HaKohen, Talmud of the Maharam Württemberg. He was born in 1260. He was killed in 1298 al Kiddush Hashem with his entire family. He comes along and says it can't be what the Ravan said, very simply because we have a medrash that everybody quotes and I never found, that says that there's 3 things that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi told his kids before he died. And one of them was, don't eat the Shabbos meal until you do Shtayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi wouldn't have said what he said if it wasn't an obligation. In addition to which, in that same Gemara, we have a story of Rabbi Bibi bar Rabbi Abaye that wanted to make up all the Shtayim Mikra Ve'echad Targums he missed on Erev Yom Kippur. And they told him, you have a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. Don't do that on Erev Yom Kippur. It's going to be too much. You're going to forget to eat. Well, obviously, they wouldn't have given him that answer if there was no obligation whatsoever. Obviously, there is an obligation. They just told him bad timing. And therefore, Paskins Da'agaot Mamoniot, in the name of the Rish, Shekol Shavua Havayim Atzibur. All week, you have to read the Parsha of that week with the congregation. So whatever Parsha it is that week, you have an obligation personally to read on your own, Shtayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum. What's the start-off point during the week? We come to a Machlokes Rishonim. Olam Yashlim Adam Parshiyotav Im Hatzibur. It seems like when the congregation changes Parshas, that's when we change. And that's what the Tosfos says, that because you start reading from Mincha of Shabbos, a different Parsha, up until Mincha, you can read the Parsha of last week. That's what the Torah says, Yashim Achar Achila Kodem HaMincha, that's what the Agaot Maimoniot says, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah paskins. Having said that, the Mordechai Chavrusa of the Hagaot Maimoniot, also killed al Kiddush Hashem during those terrible praot in Rheinfeld in 1298, comes along and says, in the name of Rabbeinu Yehuda, that even though we change at Mincha, since we read that morning a different Parsha, the start-off time is Sunday. So you have to wait till at least Motzei Shabbos to start the Shenayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. The Kobel says this in the name of the Rif. The Hagaot Maimoniot says this in the name of Rabbeinu Simcha. And this is the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Yom Rishon va'elach chashuv im hatzibur. And indeed, even though we started to read at Mincha a different Parsha, at the end of the day, it's still Shabbos, Parshas, whatever, until Shabbos ends. What's the cutoff point? Here we have no less than 7 different points of view. So let's start with the Lechatchila. Comes along the tour and says, Im lo yishlim ota kodem achila, yashlim achar achila kodem mincha. Aval misham ba'elach, kivan shematchim acheret davar zmana. According to the tour, Mincha and Shabbos is the cutoff point for last week. According to the other dayot, we can probably make the case until Motzei Shabbos. Well, indeed, the 3 positions. The Tosfos brings that medrash that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi told his kids, don't eat Shabbos morning until you do Shtayim Mikra, mashma shetod gem achila tzarich lashlima. Before you eat lunch, make sure you do Shtayim Mikra. That is the position of the Mordechai, Yikar HaMitzvah, Kodem Achila B'Shabbos, just like Rebbe said to his kids before he died. Position number 2 is, Tosfos says, even if you ate lunch, you could still do it until Mincha. Position number 3 is the Or Zarua. Best thing to do before davening, namely before you get to shul and you hear the public Torah reading, you finished your private Torah reading. And that's what Rebbe really meant. Don't eat. You only eat after shul. He basically means don't go to shul and hear LAINING until you finished your personal LAINING. And other positions are a little later. For example, the Mordechai says in the name of his Rebbe, the Maharam, you can actually read it till Wednesday because that's the cutoff point for Havdalah for the Shabbos before. So until Wednesday, it still corresponds to the Shabbos before for Havdalah and also for the Parsha. There are other positions that say B'di'eved, you can make it up even later in the year. The Abud Ram says it's a good idea to make it up during Aseret Yemei Tshuva because the story in the Gemara that we quoted of Bibi Bar Abaye was he wanted to make it up on Erev Yom Kippur, explains the Abud Ram, so this Aveira shouldn't be on his head, and therefore Aseret Yemei Tshuva is also a time to make it up. The Abud Ram brings the position maybe on the night of Hoshana Rabbah, but then he rejects it and says, wait a minute, the night of Hoshana Rabbah, you only read it once, not twice, and therefore it probably doesn't mean the night of Hoshana Rabbah, but rather during Sukkot, before Hoshana Rabbah, you make up all the Shtayim Mikra ve'echad Targum that you missed during the year. Finally, Hagaot Maimoniot, name Rabbeinu Simcha, that you can read it up to Shmini Atzeret. Shmini Atzeret is the cutoff time because that's when we finish the Torah reading for the year, and therefore you got to finish it by then. So Lechatchila, every week, you do Shtayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. Well, how does this correspond to our question of the LAINING that we're going to miss? We'll see next time.